Oi oi, my name is Toad and welcome back to Painting Relic. Firstly, you don't have to have watched the last episode to know what's going on, however I would appreciate it, and if you're so inclined, a like and a subscribe would be amazing, however no pressure. But jumping straight in, I firstly had to fix some of the parts in these busts. I did this by gently submerging the bent part in some boiling water for a few seconds, removing them and holding the part in place until it had fully cooled. I then primed all of the busts matte black. I wanted to start with the militarum characters, so I took the commissar as a good starting point. I began by painting his black coat. I did this by starting with a pure black and then slowly mixing a dark turquoise colour and layering up the highlights till the layers were around 50-50 black to turquoise, as I still wanted the coat to read as black. I then painted the red. I again layered the highlights on the sash and the hat, as the first layer was 75% black to red, with the last layer being pure red. Each layer in between being a mixture of being more red to black. I base coated all of the gold areas in a warm brown. I then took a warm yellow, mixed it roughly 8 parts yellow to 1 part brown and 1 part red. This was then used as the brightest point. I placed this over the areas that I had painted brown. I then began glazing down into the brown, before then finishing off the gold by putting a dot of pure yellow in the brightest areas of the gold. Lastly, for the gold, in order to make it pop, I took a small amount of yellow, mixed it with white, and placed it on the very brightest spots. I painted the fabric parts of the medals with a dark green, then mixed in some yellow to create my highlights, and for the skin I started off with the same warm brown as the gold, as I wanted to create a very rugged skin tone, so I gradually mixed in some more white to the brown and added more layers until I had a pale flesh look. I finished him off by painting the view scanner yellow on his left eye. Moving on to the next model, I wanted to do the Psycho, Ratling and Ogrin all together, as they basically have the same paint job. I started off with the tunics on the Ratling and the Psycho. I did this by base coating them in a warm brown, and once again highlighting up to a tan. Each layer I did had more tan mixed into the brown. I deliberately did this quite scratchy as I wanted the clothing to look more rugged. For the Ogrin, who had a vest on, I followed the same steps, however I started with a tan and layered up to a white. I then gave all 3 of them a brown wash. I then moved on to the leather. This was done by putting a base coat of warm brown down over all the parts, and then once that had dried, I did a few scratchy layers, deliberately trying to make my brush strokes look like scratches in the material, by gradually mixing in more of my orangey brown into the warm brown. I finished it off by glazing some of the original warm brown over the leather. For the green pauldrons on the Ogrin and the Ratling, I started off with a dark green. I did 2 thin coats in order to get a good base coat, then in order to get a more washed out look, I began by mixing tan into my highlights, in order to highlight them. I finished it off by glazing a mixture of dark teal and dark green over the top in order to darken down all of the areas. I wanted to give the Ratling some more pop, so I painted his cap the same as the commissar's cap, and the sash, before then moving on to the skin for all 3. I wanted to add some cohesion for the commissars, so I did the skin tone the same as the commissars, by mixing more white into the brown till it looked like a pale flesh tone on all 3 of them. I then did the eyes. These were done by simply going over them with a pure white and adding a dot of black where I wanted the iris to be looking. Then I moved on to the non-metallic silver. This was done largely the same as the gold. I started with a black base coat. I then did a layer of very light grey in spots. I then glazed some light grey over the black in order to blend the 2 together, before then lastly putting a final bright light grey highlight in the centre of the grey segments, like so. I finished off the guard models by painting any pipes and lenses with a red, the same as the sash. And moving on to the Inquisitor, I painted his armour the same as the red again. A lot of red in this video, I know. However, I then mixed some yellow into the red, and did a few orange highlights in order to give a slightly different look to the model. I then moved on to the cloak. I did this the same as the Ogrin shirt, with the tan being blended into the white, with a brown wash over both the cloak and the red armour. For the face, I did a slightly differently, as I wanted it to look less gaunt, so I took an orangey brown and did my usual highlight up till white. I did the lens in green and started with a dark turquoise by gradually mixing more yellow into it. The eye was done the same way as the guard's eyes, so I also did the hair in a silvery grey, so you can use the non-metallic metal silver to finish this step. And lastly, I did all of the non-metallic gold metals, the same as the commissar's gold. Moving on to the last model, and possibly the simplest. For the bodysuit, I did it the very same way as the commissar's coat. Then for the armour plates, I did a very muted non-metallic silver, but for a new segment, I did the bone colours by starting with a coal brown and highlighting up to a white, as I wanted a bleached bone look. I did the leather the same way as everything else, and then I finished it off by doing the lenses much the same way as the Inquisitor's armour, just with a tad more yellow mixed in to make it significantly more orange. But with that, I was left with these. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll be back to kit bashing over the next 2 weeks at least, and I hope you join me as I'll be showing you how to make several different styles of traitor guard. But have a wonderful week, and if you subscribe, I'll definitely see you next week. Ta-ra!